Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for another review. We're entering this December crunch period in which I have a lot of reviews I'm trying to get out before the end of the year so I can also get my top 10 best and top 10 worst out before January happens. Those videos are coming, they just might take a little bit more time. Today we're talking about one of my most anticipated films of the year, and that is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. This is a remake of the 1922 silent film, which, and I'm surprised more people don't know this, was basically an unlicensed adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula story. And even fewer people seem to be aware of the fact that this was already remade once in 1979 by a German filmmaker named Werner Herzog. The general premise is exactly the same as it was in the previous two versions. Happily married couple Thomas and Ellen Hutter are living in Germany during the 1830s. Thomas works in real estate and his supervisor sends him on a journey to visit the very reclusive Count Orlok in his secluded castle, with the intention of getting him to sign a land deal. Meanwhile, Ellen, back at home, is having premonitions of doom and gloom, eventually becoming convinced that death itself is coming for her entire town. I think Robert Eggers is one of the greatest modern working filmmakers. I have some unpopular takes when it comes to his films. The Witch is probably my least favorite. I actually really loved The Northman and The Lighthouse. Those are probably my two favorites. But back when this film was in the early stages and I had only heard about its announcement, I thought to myself, this is going to be a slam dunk. I mean, if you wanted somebody to remake Nosferatu, it would be the guy who has a strong sensibility for moody, gothic period pieces. And that sensibility works wondrously here. You could seriously pause at any moment and find yourself staring at a frame that is worthy of being wall-mounted. There are an insane number of gorgeous establishing shots of mountains and castles. All of the architecture feels true to its time. Practical makeup, costuming, and apparently 2,000 real live rats that were on set as well, which is just horrifying to think about. I actually like rats, I have nothing against them, but in the context of a film like this, in which rats were well known to carry horrific diseases that would wipe out large populations of humanity, it adds to the effect to know that they are real rats in the film. It's very snowy as well, which is fitting. A lot of people are wondering, why is this coming out over Christmas? Is it technically a Christmas film? No, absolutely not. It might be set around the time period of Christmas. I think one of the characters actually mentions that, but it is not a Christmas film. However, it has the vibes, it has the winter vibes that I think are fitting for a big horror release at this time of year. It's also very desaturated, a lot of the colors are muted, and I don't think it ever reaches black and white, but it comes close at certain times. All of these choices that Eggers makes add to this mood that he establishes so seamlessly. While I was never truly terrified, shaken to my core, checking the backseat of my car on the way out of the film, it is very creepy in an atmospheric way. I kind of feel like the sense of impending doom when Count Orlok isn't around is almost more impactful than the scenes in which he's actually present. I think the film does a great job too of showing Count Orlok in the scenes where you expect to see him because, well, I guess at least for me, I've seen the previous two films and I rewatched them recently in preparation for this. So I knew that we were going to see him somewhat early on, but they obscure him by darkness, by snowfall and other obstacles just enough so that you can see some things, but you can't see everything, and it's creepy. And what a transformation for Bill Skarsgård. We'll talk more about how I feel about the design soon enough, but regardless of what you think of it, you cannot see this man behind the performance because it is that otherworldly and different looking from Bill Skarsgård with no makeup on. Something that surprised me is that there's actually a fair amount of jump scares in the film. When you look back at something like The Witch, which Eggers also did, it's very slow building, very suspenseful and atmospheric, and it doesn't have jump scares, really, at all. I don't think it had any. This has quite a few, lots of sequences of characters walking down dimly lit hallways, and that Count Orlok is probably lurking there somewhere, so they'll shine their candlelight up somewhere. He's not there. They'll look away for a second, and then pop, he's there. But the suspense is still there, so it doesn't feel cheap. It's not like these jump scares were unearned. In fact, some of them were a pleasant surprise because they actually got a decent jolt out of me. For better or worse, I think this is definitely the most pedestrian approach that we've gotten out of the three Nosferatu films, and what I mean by that is just it plays things very straight. as far as the story beats in the previous two films. It doesn't deviate too much from the story that is pre-existing, both in Bram Stoker's Dracula story and the alterations that were made in the adaptation that is Nosferatu. And because of that, there were points in the film in which I sat back and wondered, did we really need another remake of Nosferatu when the 1979 one exists, which I think is great and super underrated. But then again, this is so fiendishly well made and well executed that despite the fact that it's so familiar, I was mesmerized by what I was watching. Alright, let's talk about Count Orlok's design, because it's not what I was expecting. And to be honest, I still don't really know entirely how I feel about it. And I'm sure that's how people felt when the world was introduced to Gary Oldman's version of Dracula back in 1992, because that was very radically different from what people had seen in the past as well. He is very creepy, he is. I just don't think that he's quite the nightmare fuel that people have been making this character out to be, especially in the marketing and early reviews. I mean, it's the same thing with Longlegs, right? I think people were overhyping how terrifying Nicolas Cage would actually look in that film, and then the reveal happened, which I think is still very creepy. I really like his performance in that film, but he's not the scariest character ever put on film. I guess this movie does take a few original liberties in that there's no attempt to humanize this version of Count Orlok, which does, I think, make him as a character a little bit less interesting than the Klaus Kinski version that was portrayed in the Werner Herzog film. Orlok in this film is a demon. He is nothing but a metaphor for the plague and a pure force of unmitigated evil. Okay, so clearly we're not getting much complexity or humanity from Count Orlok. That's all good and fine, so let's talk about the human characters. There's a lot that really works, and most of it comes down to Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hutter. This is a great protagonist because at the beginning of the film, it establishes that she had this connection with death long before any of the events of this film happen. I did find it a bit frustrating that we never learn why, and this isn't really a spoiler. Let's just talk about the opening scene for a second. Basically, she calls out to any good spirit that may be out there, I guess because she's lonely, and we never learn the reason behind that loneliness, but it's what causes this connection between this evil specter of doom to connect with her. Unfortunately, a lot of the other human characters are among the weaker elements of the film. I just didn't feel much of a connection to any of them because we don't learn much about any of them. I still found them likable, particularly because of the actors who are playing them, and I certainly didn't want them to die. It's not like I was rooting for Nosferatu to drink their blood. But once again, comparing this to the 1979 version, at least that version delved into the marital conflict between, well, they were different characters in that film, but they essentially fit the same archetypes, Thomas and Ellen. You know, there was a dynamic there. It's briefly touched upon here in that Ellen doesn't want Thomas to make this voyage to Count Orlok's mansion because she just has a bad feeling about it. Her dreams have been telling her that this is going to be bad for both of them. But from his perspective, he's trying to secure his career and ensure that financially he'll be able to support the family. So there's a dynamic there that could have been better explored that I think we got a little bit more of in the previous version. Aaron Taylor Johnson plays one of the other prominent characters, and he's not so good. Damn it, Aaron, I was just starting to like you after Bullet Train and The Fall Guy, and now he's sliding right back into being boring for me. I don't know, something about his expressions in this movie were not delivering the emotions that I think the dialogue was intending. And he's not terrible or anything, it's just that in a very strong cast, he stands out like a sore thumb. It takes a while for him to show up, but Willem Dafoe eventually enters the picture as a professor, almost like a Van Helsing type character who has some knowledge of vampires and the occult. Thoroughly enjoyed his presence. This is definitely a case in which the character is only as good as the actor portraying them, and he's just always going to make a scene better when he's in it. Moving back to Lily Rose Depp, she is incredible in this film. Her performance at times gets very physical, very bizarre, and even asks her to do some pretty bizarre things with her eyes that I guess the actress actually did a lot of, and I thought it was CGI. One final thought that I have is that the passage of time in this film is very poorly conveyed. We learn that Thomas's journey to the Count's estate is supposed to take like 6 weeks. And I understand that the movie's only 2 hours and 15 minutes, so we can only have these sequences of them traveling last so long. But the problem is that it cuts back and forth between his journey and Ellen back at home, and it's unclear as to how much time has passed for Ellen, when clearly lots of time has passed for Thomas. A lot of the problems that I mentioned will surely be seen by many as nitpicks, and It's an otherwise great film. I really enjoyed this. I think it's one of the best horror films of 2024 and probably one of the best films overall of the entire year. The sheer craft on display is just impeccable, and it's not just in a sense of, oh wow, I'm looking at a really beautiful oil painting. No, these visuals actually contribute to the atmosphere, the mood, the fear, the tension. All of those things work together to make this beautiful medley that does feel familiar, but it was equally effective to me. I'm gonna give Nosferatu 4 stars. Did I mention the score? The score is awesome too. I've been listening to it, especially the clips that are used in the climax. So there you have it. It's not exactly a family film, but I would highly recommend that you take the time to go out and see Nosferatu on the biggest screen that you can. And be sure to drop down into the comments and let me know what you think of it once you have. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe while you're at it if you want to see more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.